James had always loved the wilderness. It was quiet, peaceful, and free from the chaos of the world. For years he had traveled across different lands, cooking his meals over an open fire and living on what the forest provided. Today was no different. He had found a quiet spot near a small stream, far away from any roads or settlements. The air was fresh, and the only sounds were the gentle flow of water and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He had been cooking meat on the fire, the smell filling the air. It was one of his favorite things to do slowly, cooking the meat until it was tender and flavorful. James wasn't in a rush. The night was still a few hours away, and he had plenty of time to enjoy the moment. He sat back against a tree, enjoying the warmth of the fire as the meat sizzled. As he stared into the flames, something strange happened. A voice, soft but clear, echoed through the trees, breaking the silence. "Can I join you?" the voice asked. James froze. His hand, which had been holding a stick to turn the meat, stopped midair. He had heard nothing but the sounds of nature for hours. There was no one around, he was sure of it. But now someone was talking to him. His first instinct was to stand up. But he stayed seated, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice steady but full of caution. There was a brief silence. Then the voice answered again, "I'm just looking for a place to rest. I don't mean any harm." James squinted into the shadows, trying to make out any figure in the fading light. But all he saw was the thick forest and the faint glow of the fire. "I don't usually let strangers close to my camp," James said. Still on alert, he had learned the hard way that the wilderness could be dangerous, and trusting someone blindly wasn't always the smartest move. But there was something about the voice that seemed different. It wasn't threatening, but it didn't feel entirely normal either. The voice responded, "I understand, but I'm not here to cause trouble, just to rest. I've been traveling." For a long time, James hesitated. He had been alone in the wilderness for days, and the company, even from a stranger, sounded tempting. But caution held him back. He didn't know who this person was or what they wanted. The woods were full of dangers, and some of those dangers weren't from wild animals. "Where are you from?" he asked, trying to gather some information. His mind raced, thinking of all the possibilities. He was prepared for many things, but not for someone showing up out of nowhere. "I'm far from here," the voice said, and James noticed a hint of hesitation. "I'm just looking for a moment to rest before I continue on my journey." James stood up slowly, keeping his hand near the knife at his side. "If you're not dangerous, then show yourself." There was a pause before the figure stepped out from the trees. James' heart skipped a beat. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The person standing before him wasn't like anyone he had ever seen before. She wasn't tall, but her presence felt much bigger than her size. Her skin was an unusual shade of blue, and her eyes, large and deep, had a glowing quality to them. Her clothes were unlike anything James had ever seen, simple yet made from a material that seemed to shimmer faintly in the firelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. James could only stare, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. Who was she? What was she doing here? He had been alone for so long that the sudden appearance of someone so different left him speechless. The woman smiled, a gentle, almost knowing smile. "You're not afraid, are you?" she asked, her voice calm and soothing. James shook his head, trying to regain his composure. "I'm not sure what to think. I've never seen anyone like you before." She nodded, understanding. "I know, I'm not from here." The words struck James like a cold wind. Not from here? He had heard stories of strange beings, but he had never believed in them. And yet standing before him was proof of something he could not explain. "Are you human?" he asked cautiously. The woman laughed softly, the sound like the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Not exactly," she replied. "But I look human enough, don't I?" James still couldn't take his eyes off her. The firelight made her skin glow, and the more he looked, the more he realized that she didn't just look unusual. There was something about her that felt otherworldly, like she wasn't just a person, but something else entirely. "Where are you from?" James asked again, this time his voice more curious than cautious. "I come from far away," she answered, "but that's a long story." James felt a shiver run down his spine. Didn't know whether to trust her or not. Everything about this situation was strange, and his instincts told him that she wasn't just a lost traveler. There was more to her story than she was letting on. She took a step closer to the fire, and James instinctively took a step back, not out of fear, but out of the desire to understand what was going on. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. "Gently, I just need a place to rest." "May I?" James studied her for a moment. She didn't seem dangerous, but then again he had no way of knowing what she was capable of. But there was something in her eyes, a kind of honesty, that made him lower his guard just a little. "All right," he said slowly, motioning to the fire. "You can stay for a while. But I don't know if I can offer much else." The woman's smile widened, and she sat down near the fire. "This is enough. Thank you." As James sat back down, watching her closely, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. Something about her made him feel both uneasy and fascinated. He had always been alone in the wilderness. But now, with this stranger by his fire, he couldn't help but wonder, who was she, and why had she come to him of all people? The fire crackled as the two sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. James watched the woman closely as she settled near the flames. She seemed at ease, as if the wilderness was a familiar place to her. Couldn't help but wonder how someone so different could look so comfortable in such a harsh environment. She was calm as the firelight flickered in her eyes. And James, though still cautious, found himself drawn to her strange yet peaceful presence. "I'm sorry," James finally said, breaking the silence. "I haven't introduced myself. I'm James." The woman looked up at him with a soft smile, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "I'm Lyra." "Lyra," James repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It felt strange, but in a way, it also felt right. "I've traveled a long way," she said after a moment, her gaze distant, as if she was seeing something far beyond the fire and trees. "A long, long way, from a place very different from here." James nodded, unsure what to make of her words. "I'm sure you've seen a lot of things then. How did you end up here?" His curiosity was growing, despite his wariness. Something about her made him want to know more, even though he didn't fully trust her yet. Lyra turned her head to look at him, her eyes darkening with thought. "I was searching for something," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "Something that's very important." James raised an eyebrow. "What were you looking for?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the fire. "That's not something I can explain right now." James could tell that she wasn't ready to share everything with him, and he respected that. He had his own secrets, after all, and he knew how important it was to keep some things to yourself. "You're not from Earth, are you?" he asked, more a statement than a question. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment her gaze seemed to soften. "No, I'm not," she admitted. "I come from a place far away, my people. We are not like humans." "Then how did you get here?" James pressed, his curiosity taking over again. Lyra took a deep breath, as if weighing whether or not to continue. "It's a long story, but the short version is, I was sent here on a mission." Her voice faltered for a moment, but things didn't go as planned. James felt a strange sense of sympathy for her. She seemed far more than just a traveler. There was something in her tone that made him think she had been through more than she let on. "You're running from something, aren't you?" James asked, sensing the hidden truth in her words. Lyra's eyes darkened for a brief second, before she quickly masked it with a calm expression. "Yes, I am. But that's all I can say for now. I don't want to put you in danger." James studied her for a moment. He had never been the type to pry too deeply into someone's past, but there was something about her that felt genuine. She wasn't like the typical travelers he encountered. She was different. And there was no denying the strange connection he felt, like he was meant to meet her. "I understand," he said finally, leaning back against the tree. "I don't know who or what you're running from, but I'm not going to ask you to share anything you're not ready to." Lyra gave him a thankful smile, and for the first time since they had met, the tension in the air seemed to lessen. She didn't seem as guarded anymore. The fire crackled between them, and after a few moments, Lyra spoke again. "You've been out here for a while, haven't you?" "Alone." James nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "I prefer it that way. The wilderness is my home. It's peaceful." Lyra tilted her head slightly as if studying him. "It must be difficult, though. Being alone all the time." James paused, then shrugged. "I've learned to live with it. I find comfort in the quiet, in being alone with my thoughts." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're not really alone." "Are you?" James looked up at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, even when we're by ourselves, we're never truly alone," she said. Her voice calm, yet filled with some hidden depth. "There are things around us, watching, listening. The stars, the trees, the animals, we're all connected." James felt a strange sense of understanding in her words. It wasn't something he had ever really thought about before, but hearing her say it made him reflect on his time alone in the wilderness. Maybe she was right, maybe he wasn't as isolated as he had always believed. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the rest of the evening, they exchanged stories. James shared tales of his survival in the wild, of the times he had barely escaped danger and had to rely on nothing but his instincts to stay alive. Lyra listened intently, her eyes reflecting the firelight, occasionally offering insights of her own, although she didn't reveal much about her past. As the night wore on, James couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with this strange woman. Despite the mystery surrounding her, despite the questions that still lingered in his mind, he found himself enjoying her company. She was different, yes, but in a way that made him feel like he wasn't so alone after all. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the camp. James and Lyra sat together, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them. It was a strange yet comfortable silence that filled the space between them. And for once, James didn't feel the need to guard himself so closely. There was something about Lyra, something that made him trust her, even though he still didn't fully understand who she was. As the night grew colder, James offered her a blanket, which she accepted with a grateful nod. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like enough. They both settled in for the night, the sounds of the forest surrounding them. James closed his eyes, drifting off to sleep, his mind still racing with questions about Lyra and her story. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of being alone. The morning light broke through the trees, casting a soft glow over the campsite. James woke up to the familiar sounds of the wilderness birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the gentle rush of the nearby stream. For a moment, everything felt normal. But then his mind wandered back to the strange woman sitting across the fire from him. Lyra had been quiet during the night, her presence a constant mystery. They had shared stories and a meal, but she still hadn't revealed much about herself. James knew she was hiding something, but part of him didn't want to push her. She had a way of making him feel like he wasn't just another survivor of the wilderness. She made him feel connected in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the fire slowly died down, James sat up and stretched. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his face, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind the company. It was strange, really. A few days ago, he would have been suspicious of anyone showing up in the wilderness. But now, with Lyra, he felt different. It wasn't fear or doubt, it was curiosity, a deep need to understand her. Lyra was already awake when he turned his attention to her. She sat near the edge of the campsite, gazing out into the trees. Posture was calm, almost meditative. The way she moved and carried herself made James think she was used to being in strange places, used to being on her own. But he also knew there was more to her than met the eye. She wasn't just a traveler. "Morning," James said, his voice still thick with sleep. Lyra turned to him, her eyes lighting up as she gave him a small smile. "Good morning." James stretched again, and then stood up, moving toward the fire. "I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get moving. The sooner we get to the next place, the better." Lyra nodded, but didn't get up right away. Was still watching him, studying him. James could feel her gaze, like she was trying to decide whether or not to trust him with more of her story. James, she said after a moment, her voice soft yet serious. I think it's time I told you more about why I'm here? James froze, his hand hovering over the small pack he had prepared. He turned slowly to face her, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. She hadn't mentioned anything about this before, and her words hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise. I didn't want to tell you before, she continued, her gaze fixed on the ground, but I think you deserve to know. You've been kind to me, and I owe you the truth. James set his pack down carefully and sat on a nearby rock, trying to steady his breathing. He had a feeling this was going to be something big, something that could change everything. Go on, he said, his voice steady, but his heart began to race. Lyra took a deep breath, then began. I'm not from this planet, she said. I come from a place far away, a world that doesn't even exist on any map here. James didn't respond at first, his mind trying to process her words. Not from Earth? She had hinted at it before. But hearing her say it out loud made it real. I knew it, James muttered under his breath, half to himself. It didn't surprise him as much as it should have, but it still sent a chill down his spine. But why Earth? Why come here? Lyra looked at him, her expression sad. I didn't choose to come here. My people. We were forced to send me to this world. It's a part of something much bigger, something I've been running from ever. Since, she paused for a moment, her hands fidgeting with the fabric of her clothes. James could tell she was gathering her thoughts, trying to decide how much to say the truth is. She began again, her voice quieter this time. I was sent here on a mission, but it wasn't a mission I agreed with. I was supposed to help prepare Earth for something terrible that's coming, something that could destroy everything. James felt a weight settle in his chest. His first instinct was to ask her more questions, but something in her eyes told him she wasn't finished yet. He waited, watching her closely. I tried to escape, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't want to be part of it. I didn't want to help bring destruction to this world. But my people, they didn't care. I was just a tool for their plans. James felt his heart race. What kind of plans? What are they doing to Earth? Lyra's eyes filled with sorrow as she met his gaze. They want to control this planet. They want to use its resources and people for their own gain. They've been watching Earth for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Of that plan, James's mind spun with what she was telling him. It was hard to believe, but the sincerity in her voice made him feel that she was telling the truth. And that scared him. So you're running from them? They're after you? Lyra nodded. Yes. They've been chasing me ever since I escaped. I came here to hide, to stop what they're planning. But I didn't expect to find someone like you, someone who could help me. James stood up slowly, trying to absorb everything she had just said. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. But even in the face of all the danger, he felt a strange sense of duty. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave her. To face it alone? So what do we do now? James asked, his voice steady. How can I help? Lyra smiled weakly, grateful for his willingness to listen. I don't know yet. But I think you're part of the reason I'm here. I didn't just stumble upon this place. Maybe we can stop them together. James felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The idea of stopping an alien invasion seemed impossible, but with Lyra by his side, it didn't seem so out of reach. The first time since meeting her, he believed. They might actually have a chance. Let's do it then, James said, his voice full of determination. Let's stop them. Lyra's eyes shone with a quiet gratitude. Thank you. As the two of them prepared to leave the campsite, James couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. One thought he was just living a quiet life in the wilderness. But now, he was part of something much bigger. A dangerous adventure that could change the fate of Earth itself. The day had barely begun when the silence of the wilderness was shattered. James and Lyra had packed their things, ready to leave the campsite behind. They needed to move quickly, to stay ahead of the unknown enemies who were hunting her. The air was thick with tension, and neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Lyra had been quiet since they made the decision to leave. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by an edge of nervousness, and James noticed. that she kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the trees. "Something's wrong," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. James felt a tight knot form in his stomach. He wasn't used to feeling paranoid, but with the way Lyra acted, he couldn't ignore the suspicion that something was following them. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Lyra replied, her voice filled with worry. "But I can feel them. ... They're close." James looked around, the forest surrounding them thick with trees and underbrush. The idea of being hunted by something or someone felt all too real. He knew the wilderness could be dangerous, but this was different. It was as if they weren't just in danger from the environment. It felt like something more, something that knew them and was coming for them. "We need to move faster," James said, grabbing his pack and slinging it over his shoulder. "If they're close, we need to get out of here." Lyra nodded, but her eyes were distant, as if listening to something. James couldn't hear. Stepped forward, moving with a speed that seemed to match her unease. James followed closely behind, his senses on high alert. He couldn't explain why, but his instincts were telling him that every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs was something more than a random sound of nature. They walked for hours, the forest growing denser with each step. The light grew dim as the trees thickened, and James began to wonder if they were truly alone. Lyra kept her head down, her movements cautious, as if she were listening for a sound he couldn't hear. "I think we're being followed," she said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. James' heart skipped a beat. "How can you tell?" Lyra stopped and turned, her gaze sweeping the area around them. "They're using the trees. Trying to stay hidden," she explained, her voice tense. "I can feel their presence. They want me, and they won't stop until they get me." James swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He had thought they were safe for a while, but now the danger was real. "We need a plan," he said, trying to think of their next move. Lyra shook her head. "We don't have time for a plan. If they find us, it's over. We need to move now." They picked up the pace, moving through the thick underbrush as quickly as possible. James tried to stay focused, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. But no matter how fast they went, no matter how many turns they took, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded, like prey in a hunt. It was almost as if their enemies were toying with them, letting them believe they could outrun them before closing in for the kill. Suddenly,
"Ow!"
the sound of footsteps broke through the silence. James turned sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no sign of the enemy yet, but he could feel their presence like a shadow creeping closer. "Get down!" Lyra hissed, pulling him down behind a large rock. They crouched low, pressing themselves against the cool stone, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. James could feel his heart thundering in his chest, his ears straining to hear anything that would tell him where their pursuers were. And then, he heard it faint at first, but growing louder. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps moving through the underbrush. They were closing in. "We're not going to outrun them," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. "They're too fast. They'll catch us before we even get a chance to fight. Back." James turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Then what do we do?" Lyra looked around, her mind clearly working at lightning speed. "We don't have a choice. We have to face them." Together, James swallowed hard. He wasn't a soldier. Had never been in a real fight before. The wilderness had taught him how to survive, how to be resourceful. But facing down an enemy who could be just as skilled, if not more, was a whole different challenge. Still, he didn't have much of a choice. If they were going to get out of this alive, he had to trust Lyra. She was clearly prepared for whatever was coming. "Okay," James said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. "We fight." Lyra nodded, her face grim. "Stay close to me. We'll take them by surprise. It's our best chance." They moved quickly, positioning themselves behind some thick bushes, waiting for the right moment. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were getting closer. James felt his palms sweat as he gripped a nearby branch, trying to steady his nerves. Then, just as the first figure emerged from the trees, Lyra sprang into action. She moved like a shadow, faster than anything James had ever seen. She ducked low, using the environment to her advantage, and in a swift motion, she knocked the figure off balance. The man, if that's what he was, fell to the ground with a grunt. James didn't wait. He followed her lead, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it at another figure that appeared from behind a tree. The branch connected with a loud crack, and the man stumbled backward, but he didn't fall. "Watch out," Lyra shouted, as another figure appeared, this one moving with unnatural speed. He lunged at James, but Lyra was faster, knocking the man aside with a swift kick. In the chaos, James barely had time to catch his breath. It felt like a blur, movements too quick to track, sounds too loud to understand. All he could do was keep his focus on surviving, on staying close to Lyra and trusting her instincts. They fought together, side by side, each taking down an enemy, each moving with a speed and precision that surprised James. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted with Lyra, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting out of here alive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of their attackers lay on the ground, unconscious, or worse. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra turned to James, breathing heavily, but with a look of determination in her eyes. "We can't stop here," she said urgently. "They'll be back with reinforcements. We need to keep moving." James nodded, his body aching from the brief fight, but he didn't hesitate. There was no time to waste. They had made it out of this encounter, but it was clear that their enemies wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "We're not safe yet," James said, his voice tight. "Let's go." Without another word, the two of them disappeared into the trees, knowing that the hunt wasn't over. They were still in danger, but for now, they had survived. And that, James realized, was all that mattered. The sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the wilderness as James and Lyra continued their journey. Their pace had slowed a little after the attack. Both of them were tired, physically drained, and still on edge. Every rustle in the bushes, every crack of a branch made them jump, expecting another ambush. But as the hours passed, they managed to find a moment of peace. They came across a small clearing with a stream running through it. The water was clear and cool. The sounds of the flowing water were soothing to their frazzled nerves. "We should rest here," Lyra suggested, her voice quiet but steady. She had been leading the way since the attack. Her movements smooth and practiced, but James could see the fatigue in her eyes. She wasn't as invincible as she appeared. James nodded, grateful for the chance to stop. "We need to make sure we're not being followed. Let's set up camp, but keep watch." Lyra gave him a knowing look. "I'll keep watch. You get some rest." James wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. They had been on the move for hours, and he was more exhausted than he wanted to admit. The fight with the strangers had taken a toll on both of them. The adrenaline had kept him going, but now that the danger had passed, the weight of their situation began to settle in. He set his pack down and found a place near the stream to sit. As he took off his boots, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath his feet, he looked over at Lyra. She had already started a small fire, and her movements were focused, precise. It was as if she was used to surviving in places like this, even though he knew nothing about her past. "So," James began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about your people and what you're running." Lyra didn't look up from the fire, but she nodded slightly, acknowledging his words. "You said you were sent here for a mission, but you didn't want to be part of it. Why didn't you just refuse? I mean, why would they send you if you didn't agree with it?" James asked, genuinely curious. Lyra's face softened, and she took a slow breath before answering. "It's not that simple. When you come from a place like I do, there's no such thing as refusal. It's a duty, a responsibility. My people have always been involved in things much bigger than me, much bigger than any one individual. I didn't have a choice." James frowned. "You could have just ... left. Ran away sooner." "I did," Lyra said quietly. "But I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know if anyone would believe me, and even now, I'm still not sure who I can trust." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "It's hard, you know. To be from a place where everyone knows your purpose, your role, And then to come here? To be alone? Her words hit James harder than he expected. He had never considered what it would be like to be in her position, to be far from home, running from people who saw you as nothing more than a tool. He had always prided himself on his independence, on his ability to survive alone. But now, seeing Lyra in a new light, he realized how lonely it must feel to be so different, so isolated. "You're not alone now," James said softly. "I'm here, and I'll help you as much as I can." Lyra finally looked up, her gaze meeting his. There was something in her eyes that James couldn't quite place: relief, gratitude, maybe even something deeper. It made his heart beat a little faster, and for a moment, the weight of everything else faded away. "I know," she said quietly. I don't know what I would have done without you. Thank you." James smiled, though it felt a little awkward. He wasn't used to hearing gratitude from anyone, let alone from someone as mysterious and capable as Lyra. But it felt good, in a way. Helping her, being part of something bigger than just surviving in the wilderness, gave him a purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. For the next hour, the two of them sat in comfortable silence. Lyra kept watch, her sharp eyes scanning the surrounding trees, while James allowed himself to relax, his mind still spinning with everything they had been through. Finally, Lyra spoke again, breaking the silence. "James, I don't want to ask too much of you. I know this isn't easy. I'm asking a lot of you, and I know you didn't sign up for this." James looked at her, his expression serious. "Lyra, you don't need to apologize. You're not asking too much. I may not know exactly what we're up against, but I can't just leave you out here. Not after everything we've been through. I'll help you however I can." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, James saw a glimpse of the vulnerability she had been hiding. She wasn't just some mysterious figure from another world. She was a person, just like him, struggling to find her place in a world that didn't understand her. "Thank you," she whispered again, voice barely audible over the crackling fire. James nodded, his heart warming at her words. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, but now, with Lyra by his side, he realized how much he had taken for granted. The connection between them wasn't just about survival anymore. It was something more, something he couldn't explain, but something that felt undeniable as the night wore on. They shared more stories, small moments of normalcy amidst the chaos. James told her about his childhood, about growing up in the city before he left it all behind to live in the wilderness. Lyra shared a little about her own past, about her home world, though she still kept most of it hidden. They talked about everything and nothing at the same time, their bond growing stronger with every word by the time they settled down for the night. Lying beneath the stars, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Since he had met her, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He was part of something, a team, an unlikely alliance. And no matter what came next, he knew he wasn't facing it alone. "Tomorrow, keep moving," Lyra said, her voice quiet but determined. James nodded, his eyes closing as he listened. To the sounds of the wilderness around them, "Tomorrow," he agreed, and in that moment he knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The morning arrived with an unsettling stillness. James and Lyra had spent the night under the stars, their sleep interrupted only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves in the wind. The wilderness had felt quieter than usual, almost like the earth itself was holding its breath. James woke up to the sound of Lyra moving quietly beside the fire, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. For a moment, he lay still, watching her. There was something different about her today, something he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the way she moved with a greater urgency, or how the faint smile she once offered had faded into a focused determination. The closer they got to their destination, the more he could sense that she was bracing for something big. James sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "We should get moving. They'll be coming for us." Lyra nodded but didn't speak right away. She was deep in thought, her expression more distant than usual. After a long pause, she finally turned to face him. "James, there's something I need to tell you, something important." James felt his heart skip a beat. He had been expecting something like this. The quiet urgency in her voice told him that, whatever it was significant. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady, though he couldn't shake the growing anxiety in his chest. She looked at him, her gaze serious. "If we're caught, I don't know if we'll make it out alive. They won't stop until they have me, and I can't let you get hurt because of me." James frowned. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you, Lyra. We fight this together, no matter what." Lyra hesitated, and for the first time James saw the fear in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from an enemy. It was the kind of fear that came from knowing she was about to face something far beyond what she could handle alone. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out at first. Finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I can't let you be a part of this. Should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to drag you into something you wouldn't understand. My mission here was to stop a war, James, a war that could destroy everything. But now that I've met you, I realize I can't ask you to risk your life for me. I won't let you." James stood up, his resolve hardening. "You're not asking me. I'm choosing this. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. I'm not leaving you, not now. Not ever." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read him. Finally, she sighed and looked away, her expression softening. "You're stubborn," she said with a faint smile. "But I guess I am too." The brief moment of lightness didn't last long, though. Lyra quickly stood up, her eyes scanning the trees once more. James followed her gaze, realizing that the moment of peace they had found was already slipping away. They were running out of time. "We need to move," Lyra said, her voice firm again. "We don't have much time. They'll be here soon." James nodded, grabbing his pack and checking the supplies. They both knew that this was at the point of no return. Whatever came next, they would face it together as they walked through the forest. Lyra led the way with a focused determination. She moved quickly, but there was no sign of the usual grace she'd had before. She was tense, her every step cautious, as if she expected the enemy to appear at any moment. "We're getting closer," she muttered under her breath, as if trying to reassure herself. James didn't respond, but his mind was racing. He had no idea who or what they were up against, but he trusted Lyra. She was strong, stronger than anyone he'd ever met. But he also knew that there were limits to what one person could do, even someone as capable as her. They reached a high ridge, and from there, James could see the vast expanse of the wilderness stretching out below them. The trees seemed to go on forever, but in the distance there was something that caught his eye, flicker of movement, barely visible against the horizon. "They're here," Lyra said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They've found us." James turned toward her, his heart racing in his chest. "What now?" Lyra's face was set in a mask of determination. "Now we fight. It's the only choice we have." The sound of footsteps grew louder, growing closer by the second. James felt a chill run down his spine as the enemy appeared figures. Moving through the trees, their faces hidden by masks, their movements precise and coordinated. There was no doubt in his mind now. This was the moment. Lyra turned to him, her expression softening for just a second. "I'm sorry," she said. "I never wanted you to get caught in this. But you've already proven you can handle yourself." James didn't have time to reply. The first enemy charged at them, his weapon raised. Lyra was faster, ducking under the swing and delivering a quick blow that sent the man crashing to the ground. James followed her lead, using the environment to his advantage, moving quickly and unpredictably as he took down another attacker. The fight was intense. James had never experienced anything like it before. His training from years in the wilderness helped, but this was different. These enemies weren't just skilled, they were relentless. Every movement they made seemed calculated, and they didn't hesitate for a second. It was clear they had been trained for this. But James and Lyra fought together, a synchronized force that couldn't be stopped. James felt an unfamiliar strength surge through him as he matched Lyra's pace, moving with her as if they were one. Finally, the last of their attackers was on the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. James stood, breathing heavily, his body aching from the fight. His eyes were fixed on Lyra, who stood a few feet away, her face pale but determined. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes searching his. "We
Did it," she said softly. "We made it through."
James nodded, though he could feel the weight of their situation bearing down on him. This wasn't over. There would be more, and they couldn't afford to stop now. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We still have a chance," she said, her voice full of quiet strength. "But it's up to us now. We're the only ones who can stop this." James looked into her eyes, seeing the truth in her words. There was no turning back now. Together, they had made it this far, and no matter what came next, he knew he would stand by her. "Let's finish this," James said, his voice steady and resolute. And with that, they turned, ready to face whatever challenge awaited them.